Today I'm adding partial stenciling with ink blending. Hello there, Michelle Short here with Terrific Tags with Michelle. I'm here on the Altenew YouTube channel twice a month, so if you enjoy my videos I'd love for you to subscribe. So let's get started. I'm using the Craft Your Life Project Kit Flower Arch today. In the kit you get a really lovely large stamp set, the coordinating dies, 3D embossing folder. I'm not using this today but it is absolutely beautiful. And then the coordinating stencils that work with both the stamp set and also the embossing folder. I have placed a panel of white cardstock into the Stamp Wheel 2.0. and I'm taking the large floral image from the stamp set and I'm going to place that down onto the cardstock. I know that I only need the right hand side of this image to stamp perfectly, so I'm not too concerned if it doesn't all fit on this panel. I can then bring in the top flip plate of the Stamp Wheel 2.0, pop that in place and then pick up that stamp. I can flip over that plate and ink up the stamp using Obsidian pigment ink. This is a really lovely dark black ink that is perfect for lots of different techniques. I tend to always use it when I'm doing ink blending and stenciling. The ink dries pretty quickly for a pigment ink and it gives a really nice dark crisp black line. So I'm just inking up this image really well. It's quite a large image so it did take me a little while. I can flip over that plate and then I can pop it. I tend to go with the bottom corners of the stamp wheel, get those in place first, and then I can press that down onto the cardstock. And I got a pretty good impression first time. There were a couple of areas that I missed, but like I say, I'm not too concerned about all of this image because it is going to get cut down. But I am just going to double stamp this just to make sure that those lines are really nice and dark. So just inking up that stamp again. I can flip that over, making sure that that's going to line up perfectly with the first image, and then I can press that down. Usually when I'm doing ink blending, I would do the ink blending first and then the die cutting afterwards. That's just my preferred method. But for today, I'm going to die cut this out first. So I'm using the coordinating die. I've placed it over the image and I'm going to hold it down with some low tack tape and run it through my die cutting machine. I know that I'm only using some of this image, like I say, so I don't want to add loads of ink blending when I don't need it and it's going to get cut off. So just removing those inner pieces from this panel here. Some of them did get a little bit stuck and didn't cut out perfectly. That was because I didn't properly cut it on my die cutting machine. I know that I don't need the top part of this image, so it didn't really concern me if I didn't cut it out perfectly. I can now line it up onto my card panel. So my card panel is 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I'm holding that down with some low tack tape and then I can flip that over and draw a pencil line at the back so that I know where I want to cut this piece down. So I'm just going to take that to my guillotine and cut that off. And then I can just make sure that that's going to work with how I think it's going to work. So just popping it in place there on my panel, and I'm pretty happy with where that's going to end up. So I can place that down onto my sticky mat so that I can add the ink blending on top. And I'm using the coordinating stencils from the kit. I'm going to place the first one over the image here, lining that up, and then once I'm happy with the placement I can press that down and that's going to hold down onto my sticky mat. So nothing is going to move around, and I'm just going to cover that little piece there at the bottom in case I get ink on it where I don't want it. I'm using the new Marine Life Fresh Dye Ink collection today. I'm not using the lightest shade but I'm using the 3 others. I'm going in with a micro blending brush. This is the larger size of the 2 brushes in the set, and I'm kind of focusing the darker colour of these blues towards the centre of these flowers. There are a few different layers of these stencils to colour these flowers in, and also the leaves as well. I'm actually not using the other layers, I'm just using the base layer, and I'm just going to do some ink blending here so that I can have the centres of the flowers a little bit darker. So starting off with this kind of second lightest shade. And then I can go in with Ride the Wave colour, which is the kind of second darkest or third lightest, depending on how you want to say it. So again, I'm focusing that colour towards the middle of these flowers. And just trying to sort of fade that out to the outside edges of those petals. I then went in with a little bit of navy just in the very centres of those flowers. I can then bring in the Enchanted Garden Fresh Dye Ink collection. These are the two middle shades. And I'm just going to go in with the smaller of the brushes from that micro blending brush set. And I'm just going to add a tiny bit of purple just onto the edges of these flowers. I do think they look really nice just with those blues and kind of fading out to white at the edges or the tips of the petals. But I quite like having sort of a two-tone look for these flowers. I thought it was quite pretty with the blues and the purples. So just removing that stencil, and then there is the other part of the flower there on the same stencil. So I'm just going to line that back up. Press that down onto the mat, and then I can add the same ink blending on top. And then the next stencil is for the added layers, but then also that little bud there as well. So I wanted to make sure I filled that in. For the stems and the leaves, I'm using the Green Valley Fresh Dye Ink collection, and I'm just using the two lightest shades. Usually I would go a little bit darker with the leaves, but for today I thought that I would just use the two lightest shades. And I have tons of different collections of greens, but for some reason I always gravitate towards these Green Valley collection. I just absolutely love the tone of them. Please let me know I'm not the only person who gravitates towards the same colours of inks all of the time. And then for the flower centres, I'm going to go in with the navy colour. So this is going to be kind of like 2 layers of the navy. So it's going to be a little bit darker than what's already there. But it's not going to be kind of too in your face. And then I can just finish off with the last stencil there, filling in that little gap with that other branch. And then this piece here, this kind of opening, is supposed to be green, but I felt that it would look a little bit odd because you can't see the rest of the leaf. So I decided to just leave it the white of the cardstock. So for the background, I want to add some kind of brickwork on here. But the stencil that comes in the kit has that beautiful doorway. It's really beautiful, but I didn't want it on my card today. So I'm using one side of this stencil here on the right hand side, and I'm going to try and sort of block off that doorway. You are going to see the sort of edge piece there of the kind of bricks that kind of go round in the semicircle, but my image is going to cover that up, so I wasn't too concerned about that. I'm just figuring out here how far the bricks go across. I do want them to go a little bit further, but for now I'm going to fill in these ones. So adding a little bit of memo tape on the right hand side there just to make sure that I don't get any ink there. And then I can go in with Limestone Fresh Dye Ink. This is from the Rock collection. And I am going to remove quite a bit of ink from this micro blending brush here. This ink is quite, I don't want to say dark, but I want it to be as light as possible. All of these fresh dye inks, when you add them on, especially with ink blending, but also with stamping, they do tend to fade a little bit as they dry, so they do lighten up. So the colour that you add on initially, you just have to try and sort of remember that it is going to get a little bit lighter. So at this point, I know that if I added it in like fully, that it would be too dark even when it lightened up. So I do want to remove quite a bit of that ink. I'm being fairly messy here. I want some of the bricks to have the kind of darkness towards the bottom, some of them towards the side, some of them in the corners, some of them in the top. Just kind of make it look kind of like an aged wall, kind of like generally an English brick wall is kind of what the look I'm going for. So again, just kind of being fairly messy here, just adding it sort of in random places. So I can just finish up here, adding a little bit in the middle there. And then I can bring in my image and see how far it kind of goes across towards the bottom initially. I'm pretty happy with how that's going to look, but I do want to extend it further up so that you can see it when that kind of part of the flowers sort of go more towards the right hand side at the top. So just picking up that stencil there, and then again bringing back in my image here. I did this quite a few times just so I can see exactly how far I need that wall to go across. So I think I kind of want it to go as far as that really at the top. So I'm going to place it back on, and obviously this is not going to line up perfectly, but I do want to try and line it up as best as possible at the top. So where the last brick ends, I'm adding that kind of centerpiece of where the next brick starts, if that makes sense. So that part is going to be masked off, and it's going to look like that was the end of the brick and then it starts a new one. So I've kind of popped that in place there, and I can add a little bit more ink blending. I'm just going to be careful because the further I go down this stencil, the further it's misaligned. So I just want to be careful here. To be honest, if it's misaligned slightly, it's not really going to be that noticeable, especially once the ink dries. It's going to be quite light, and a lot of the is going to get covered up by the flowers anyway, but I'm just trying to be as careful as possible. The wall isn't obviously completely straight, which is really quite helpful in this instance. So if, like I said, if they are misaligned slightly, you're probably not going to really notice it too much. But I don't want to add too much here. I just want to go in a little bit more towards the top, and just a couple here as well towards the sort of top half. And then I think I'm going to be happy there. So I can just remove that, bring back in the image just to make sure that that's going to look really nice. And I really like how it kind of just fades off into the right hand side of the card. So I have set that aside to dry for a little while, and I can add some glue tape onto the back of that. And I can adhere that down onto an A2 size white card base. So that's a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. So just trying to line that up as best as possible. The panel actually was a little bit bigger than my card base, so I did take that over to my guillotine and cut that down a little bit. I can now add some instant dimension foam tape onto the back of the floral piece. And I'm just going to cut small pieces of that. This is the original size of the foam tape. I probably could have got away with the smaller kind of width. I maybe wouldn't have had to cut so many pieces, but either way, these are quite small areas. You absolutely could cut multiple pieces of the die from white cardstock and layer them up and get that dimension that way. But quite often for certain designs, I do like to have foam tape. And for this particular design, I really did want the foam tape, and I'll explain why a little bit later. So just trying to figure out the best way for me to adhere this down onto my card. I did flip it over just so that it was a little bit easier for me to see that corner there, closer to me than further away. I can flip that back round and just trying to line it up as best as possible. I do tend to just place it on really lightly to start with, so I've got kind of time to sort of wiggle it around a little bit. And then once I'm happy, I can press that down. And I did go ahead and cut that little bit of the leaf there on the right at the bottom. I have stamped and heat embossed a sentiment from the Garden Whispers Craft Your Life project kit, the one that I used in my last video. And I'm going to cut that out into a circle using one of the smaller half-tone circle dies. So just holding that down with some low tack tape and running that through my die cutting machine. I'm then going to take a pencil and make a little mark towards the top of where I want to punch a hole. I've then got a handheld punch here, and I'm just going to punch that out so that I've got a little hole in the top to create a tag. I can then add some foam tape towards the bottom of that tag, and then I can adhere that down onto the card. So again, I'm just going to place it down really lightly to start with, bring in my T-square ruler to make sure that that sentiment is straight, and then I can press that down. I'm then taking the silky lilac thread from the metallic thread set. I'm going to make that into a bow, and I do tend to make the bow a little bit bigger to start with. I just find that easier than trying to go in with a small bow to start with. It did kind of fold up on itself, so just moving that around, and then I'm holding the knot of the bow with my fingers, kind of pinching it there so that I can pull the tails to try and make it a little bit smaller, and then I can cut off those tails with some scissors. I'm then going to add a little bit of liquid adhesive onto the back of the knot. And then I can adhere that down onto the whole piece where that tag is. This was a little bit fiddly. I did have to hold it there for about 30 seconds just while that glue dried, just to keep it in place. I can then finish off with some enamel dots. So I'm using the Marine Life enamel dots and also the Enchanted Garden enamel dots. And these are the same colour families that I used for the inks. So just picking those up with the Perfect Picker and then popping them down onto the card. And this is why I like to use foam tape, because I often like to pop embellishments underneath whatever I've kind of stamped or die cuts or anything like that. So if I'd used the method of cutting lots of layers of the die cut, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So that's why I quite like to use the foam tape. But it did take me a little while to cut all those pieces, I'm not gonna lie. So just figuring out here where I want these enamel dots to go, and I think I'm just going to add one more here. Just figuring out where I'm going to place that. And then once I'm happy, I can press that down. And then I'm just going to make sure that all of those are stuck down really nicely. And so that is the card finished for today. I really love the two-tone on those flowers, and then also how that brick wall kind of just pokes out from around the side, and it's really great using that partial stenciling technique to manage to get the wall to be exactly where I wanted it to be. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Altenew blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Hey there, Lydia here. I really do hope that you've just enjoyed the video. If so, please subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, turn on the notification bell so you can get your daily dose of crafty techniques and tutorials just like this. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.